first one is that 17% of dry lining is rework. That's a huge amount of money and time wasted, and that can be anything from if it's going in too early and getting wet to error in design. The second one is that a number of you may be aware of the Getting It Right initiative, and one of their statistics is that between 10 and 25 billion pounds can be saved annually by eliminating that error. So again, it starts bringing some actual figures to it. And then just lastly, from what we see, bring it down to a very granular level, up to around 50% of specifications we get through the door are not fully compliant. So what I wanted to talk about was recommendations for manufacturers. Now, I know most of the audience here are designers, specifiers, contractors, but there's a really important role for us to play here as product manufacturers, because we're a key part of that collaboration and engagement early doors. Excuse the pun. So the three listed here, as you can see, and they're really designed to bring about clarity and simplicity in the design and specification process. So if we go into them in a little bit more detail, if we look at recommendation A, it's all about the specifier and the specification. So the specification, as has been mentioned previously, it needs to be detailed. It can't just be a performance specification now. It needs to be detailed in terms of product, and the products need to be designed as systems, so how they work and interact together, which I'll go through in a bit more detail shortly. But that also brings design workshops and reviews into play a lot more, because you need to be backed up by the manufacturer. It's all very well us saying, well, you've got to do the specification right, but we need to be there to support you, because as was mentioned previously, I feel especially sorry for architects, but with the amount of information you will have to try and take in with all the different products on the building. That's probably slightly biased towards architects, but contractors I'm sure are the same as well. In CELO we actually offer that one-to-one workshop now to help that specification, so be free to get in touch. Very own Keelan is standing at the side to help you. But to give you an example, if you've got a 30-minute fire door and you're putting it into a wall, that wall has to be tested with that door for them to create that fire barrier. So if you're putting a 30-minute fire door, for argument's sake, into a polystyrene wall, the door may last 30 minutes, but if the wall fails, they fail together. So if the door fails, the wall fails, the wall fails, the door fails. They fail or pass as a system. So it's really important that they're designed and used together as systems, as tested. That really takes us on to recommendation B, and this is where the CCPI comes in, the Code of Construction Products Information. It's not been mentioned too much yet, but this is really for us to make sure that all of the information we put out there, whether it be in our brochures, our websites, our data sheets, what we give you from NBS, is correct and accurate, but also simple enough to understand. Because as we've had earlier from Paul, it can be very complex. All the different documentation can create a lot of complexity. What's really important with our products is that we confirm what they can be used in, or how they can be used, but just as importantly, how they cannot be used. Because it's all very well saying, yep, 30-minute fire door can be used in a 30-minute wall, that's great, but that doesn't tell you what wall that is. And that can give, as an example, take a riser door in shaft wall. And shaft wall is not, that's a very common scenario, but shaft wall itself is not classed as standard support, flexible standard supporting construction. So it's not like, and that's very specific in the standard. So to use that as an example, you need to know from the manufacturer, has that door been tested in that specific wall system that you're looking to use? So again, recommendation C is, I always look at it as a bit of a carry on from recommendation B, but it's because it's around creating that clarity of information, clear communication, and what's been tested and in what system. I use this expression not bafflingly with science, because take a scenario where you've got a manufacturer with a sales team and a technical team. They don't necessarily interact, being slightly different personality types, but if they don't, the sales team may have a load of documentation, certification for a product, and the architect phones up, I need certification for this product I'm looking to use on this project. Yep, no problem at all. So we send you a zip file full of 30 different documents, all related to that product. Now, the high likelihood is that you need probably not only just one of those 30 documents, but one small section of that one document within those 30 documents. So it's really important that we can direct you to the correct area within the certification, so you can have that high level of confidence when you're specifying and designing, that when you put a system of products together, they can perform as required or better. So if we look at the ways products can be from fire, this is specifically in relation to fire, but how the information can be presented and used. We look at 3 different types of assessment, and one of those was referred to earlier, which we'll go on to. Field application reports is now the one to look at. So a lot of you would be familiar with global assessments, which is more relevant to the BS 476 certification, but for the EN 1634 standard, which we always test to now, field application reports, it's rules based, and it brings into account all of the different testing you've done on a product. So we'll often get asked by someone, can we have a test certificate for that product? We need just a test report and we just need a certificate. That basically tells you nothing, especially if it's just a single test report. There could be something within that test that actually failed, a single element, but if you look at the field of application, it gives you the detail in which all the different tests have been carried out, how it can be used, how it can't be used, and how you should be designing it. However, we all know that there are project specific details and site restrictions that we always come across, and that may be in that scenario where we need to do a project specific assessment. But just to be really clear, a project specific assessment is still based on primary test evidence. What we really want to avoid is the desktop or engineering assessment. I think Tim mentioned, I can't see him now, Tim mentioned earlier, and this question, are they dead? I really think they should be. They are extremely rare now because notified bodies are not keen on them in the slightest. And the main reason for this is because they're opinions based, and they're purely done from fire engineering principles, not primary test evidence. So you can imagine, so take the scenario I just gave you, the riser on intumescent mastic. They may look at an intumescent mastic, and that was tested between a linear joint between 2 blockwork walls, and then they tie them together because that system has been tested in blockwork. But you can see that can start getting extremely risky looking at different products, because doors and walls have to be used as a system, and it's all about the interaction between the door and the wall. So if there's an element of that intumescent mastic which doesn't really work with a metal frame because of the deflection or something, you've then got a big problem. So that's why desktop assessments they're very rare, but they should probably be dead. But the reason being is because if we can engage at a much earlier point in the project, these second 2 shouldn't really be a need at all. Or project specific assessments, there always is going to be, I think, a requirement for them. There's always going to be bits here and there that haven't been foreseen. But if we can get the design right early, then we can avoid them as much as possible. There are further recommendations covering periodic retesting. So in relation to products, they recommend testing at least every 3 years. They go through testing methods and using independent bodies for this for third-party certification. So it's not just we test a product and 20 years later we're still supplying what we think is the same thing. Materials are bound to have changed, and the system in which it was used is bound to have been updated in the previous years. So it's really important to keep up that testing. It's not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but it has to be done to prove that constancy of performance. By proving that constancy of performance, we can give you that accurate information that we can be confident it will perform time and time again in the same manner used in the systems that it was tested within. If a price seems too good to be true, it really most likely is. There is a minimum threshold cost to making a product compliant. So if there's an inordinately cheaper price, there has to be a reason for it. Often materials may overlap between different products, but it's really important to read and understand that certification. We'll come back to these recommendations I was talking about earlier. understanding how they were tested, in what systems. And if we look at value engineering, this is part of the Building Safer Future document, but there's the National Market Surveillance coming on board for the product substitution. But if we look at take these two pictures as an example in relation to certification, the front cover or the test certificate, as we sometimes get asked for, will say, I want a stair balancers with a horse at the bottom, or that's what the front cover says. The field of application will tell you the type of wood to use, how it's finished, the density of wood, the exact position on the stair, and everything within that photo you can see to allow you to get that design and specification right in the first place. So I know it's a slightly extreme example, but hopefully that kind of describes to you the reason why you should look at the whole certification rather than just looking at a front cover or a test certificate itself. But finally, just my final note on that is that you should really be backed up by manufacturers. We should be able to help you understand the certification at any given point. The earlier the better. We always recommend certainly a consideration of fire doors and walls as systems at RIBA stage 2. Now I know that may sound very early, but what that does is, to give you an example, take riser layouts. Now within the EN testing standard, there's certain nib sizes which are required, and if the riser layouts are not looked at carefully, to achieve the right nib sizes, you start restricting access because the doors are going to have to get smaller or shift around. So that's just one example of why that early collaboration is really key. If you're speaking to a manufacturer and they can't give you the correct information or the where to look or help you understand it properly, you are talking to the wrong manufacturer.